This is the second of 3 lectures on Hajj Mahmud Kati's Tarikh al-fattash. So this is part 2, and in this lecture we will discuss the rise of the Songhay dynasty of the Askiyas. In the previous lecture we discussed introductory matters, and in the final lecture we'll look at the fall of the Songhay dynasty when Timbuktu and Gao were invaded by the Moroccans from the north, or from Marrakesh. Now, I also have, so if you're coming to this for the first time, probably better off going to part 1. And even previous to that, the lecture on Sahelian Scripture, which deals more generally with questions of Sahelian writing philosophies and ideologies. And these lectures where we'll discuss some of those questions in passing, but we're trying to get more deeper into the actual text itself and the events that are being described in this very important document, the Tarikh al-fattash. So I won't spend a lot of time reintroducing this material. You really need to go back to part 1. We're going to, in fact, pick up where we left off last time as we're going through our close reading of this text. And in this case, we'll focus in on the rise of the dynasty. Again, we're following that griot idea of what Thomas Hale calls the hourglass effect, in the way in which the griot epic focuses on, of the epic of Askia Muhammad, focuses on the rise of the dynasty and then the fall of the dynasty. It's called hourglass because what happens in the middle is not all that significant in terms of drama, because it's significant in terms of the fact that it marks an era of peace and prosperity. And in the Tarikh al-fattash, that's signaled by the reign of the Askiya Dawood. But that period of peace and prosperity, there's not, in terms of drama, there's not a whole lot of history that happens because people are really enjoying the prosperity, the apex of the prosperity of the dynasty. But we'll focus on what happened to enable the rise of the Askiya Muhammad to power, and then what happened in the era of his grandsons when things began to fall apart and the dynasty was finally attacked by the Moroccans from Marrakesh under Suli Ahmed Mansour, and then thereafter became a vassal to the north. And I think this history too, as we'll see, is important because it's an ongoing history. Recently, northern Mali has experienced yet another invasion of the north, this time, from Libya, but also aided and abetted by Algerians, as Jeremy Keenan has explored in his The Dying Sahara. So it's one of the reasons why we're looking at the history is because it's relevant now. It doesn't just tell us about the past, but it tells us something about the present and this ongoing history of this region. Now, the image that you're looking at, that's not from the Timbuktu Gao area. That's actually from Agadez in northern Niger. I had a chance to visit there a number of years ago, and but the mosque was built by the Songhay, or by Askia Muhammad, en route to Mecca during the Hajj to Mecca, and so you have this legacy across the Sahara where his traces are left, and that mosque is still there, and it's in Agadez, which is an important Tuareg city. A lot of Tuareg in Timbuktu as well, and Gao. But in the Niger region, the Songhay that came to that part of Africa began to develop a different dialect. They're known as a Zarma. And so, like, for instance, the Nuhu Malio in the epic of Askia Muhammad, who recounts the story of Mamar Kase, or Askia Muhammad, is recounting it in Zarma, which is a dialect of Songhay. And so again, I have 3 lectures on the epic version, which tells the same story, but from the perspective of the griot, and you can find that also on my YouTube channel. But here we're going to go right into this question of the rise of the dynasty and what took place, and we'll just pick up where we left off. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing this material since I've already done that. But here you can see again, this is where the empire was located. There's the rough dates from 1464 to 1591, which also includes the time of Sunni Ali Ber, or the Shi Ali, or C, as he's referred to in the epic of Askiya Muhammad, as we will discuss. Here again is on the far left, the Arabic version. In the middle, the French version published about 100 years ago. And then the more recent English language translation of the Tarikh al-fattash, which is available from Africa World Press, which you can get and learn more about this history that we are discussing. Again, the full title, The Chronicle of the Seeker, serving as an account of the towns, armies, and leading figures of the Takur. So let's start with, now, after this introductory chapter, we talked about the question of the forgery of Sekou Amadou, but as you get deeper into the history, the narrator, the author, speaks a bit about other, and remember there's a composite, there are other authors besides Kati, but so I'm just referring to this generally as the author of the text speaks of, there's a whole chapter on Sunni Ali Ber, or the Shi Ali. Now, he's a really interesting figure. People have a lot of different opinions about him. Leopold Sédar Senghor wrote a poem which he praises him. Jean Rouch, the famous French ethnographer and filmmaker who studied the Songhay for many years, many decades, thought that Sunni Ali Ber was the true hero of the Songhay and the true founder of the dynasty. He may have been in a practical, political, sort of Machiavellian sense, in the sense that he certainly attacked a lot of people, was noted for being very brutal. In the Tarikh al-fattash, as I said in the last lecture, the scribes don't have a very positive view about the Shi Ali, because of he had been very, not only cruel to the so-called heathen that he attacked as he rounded up or consolidated the power of the Songhay. He also was pretty brutal to Muslims. Now, nominally, he was a Muslim, but his Islam was very sort of loose. He was loosely affiliated with Islam. He's more affiliated with animism, and he seemed to be fairly indifferent to the feelings and views of the scribes and the jurists of Timbuktu, which was a great center of Islamic learning, and so consequently, they don't have a very positive view of him, but they adored the Askiya Muhammad, because after the death of Sunni Ali Ber, or the Shi Ali, the Askiya Muhammad honored the scribes and held them in high esteem, and was, by all accounts, an actual, not just nominally a Muslim, but in fact an authentic believer, and did his best to be devout. He was a pious man, the Askiya Muhammad. Sunni Ali Ber was far from pious. Now, again, this is the text I really recommend. I said 3 lectures on this you can find on the same channel, but it's based on this text that Thomas Hale compiled and entitled The Epic of Askiya Muhammad. And Thomas Hale, a friend and colleague of mine, spent a number of years studying. He was in the Peace Corps in Niger, and then he went back and began transcribing this griot epic. And he also, in a book called Scribe Griot Novelist, compares it to the Tarikhs, and as well as to Yembo Walagum's Duty of Violence. I do recommend that you have a look at this. It's really interesting to see what the griot does compared to what the scribes do, because the griots are more linked to the culture of animism, as opposed to the scribes, who are more linked to Islamic culture. All right, so let's begin our analysis of the text. We're told that after the reign of the Shi Baru del Yombo came the reign of the Shi Modogo, then the Shi Muhammad Kukuya, the Shi Muhammad Fari, the Shi Balama, and the Shi Suleiman Dama, who according to some was named Dandi. The Shi Suleiman Dama was the forefather of the inhabitants of the town of Arham. It was he who vanquished the people from the province of Mima, pillaging their territory and destroying their power. The successor of Suleiman Dama was the tyrant, the debauched, the cursed, the oppressor, the Shi Ali, the last king of this dynasty, who was a model of shameful conduct for his entourage. So the authors of the Tarikh al-fattash are giving us the lineage of the Shis. Now, so before the Askiyas, you had the Shis. This was linked to the Dia dynasty. And so there was the Shi dynasty, and Shi Ali was the last Shi in this dynasty. Now, there was the Shi Baru, who was his son, but it was the Shi Baru whom the Askiya Muhammad challenged and wrestled power from, and then at that point gave rise to the beginning of the Askiya dynasty. It's interesting, the actual name Askiya is said to come from, I mean, now there are different legends about this. It was an actual title in the military, the Songhay military as well. But there's one legend that it comes from a Songhay phrase, which means he shall not be it. And this legend goes along the lines that after the Askiya Muhammad defeated the Shi Baru and rose to power, that the daughters of Shi Ali said, he shall not be it. And he was amused by this, and he took that for his official title. That's probably a fanciful etymology, but in any case, that's one you do come across. But Askiya Muhammad was a general in the army of Shi Ali. And in the epic, you get these stories about a jinn comes up from the water, and the jinn gives to the Askiya Muhammad, or as he's called, Mamar Kase in that epic, his spear and rings of power, and he uses that to kill his tyrannical uncle Si, who is another word for Shi Ali. Well, the Shi Ali was not the Askiya Muhammad's uncle, but that's how the epic of the more mythologized epic recounts that history. In fact, he was a relatively, I mean, he was a general in the army, and there are conversations of them when the Shi Ali was still alive that was recorded. But when the Shi Ali died, it was the Askiya Muhammad who became sovereign. Now, again, notice again the description in the Tarikhs of Shi Ali: debauched, cursed, oppressor. You get tyrant. These are the kinds of adjectives that are used throughout. And then we're going to get images of the things that he did that so infuriated the scribes and the jurists of Timbuktu. The Shi Ali was always victorious, we're told, pillaging every land on which he fixed his choice. Whenever he was present, his armies were never defeated or vanquished. They were always victorious. From Kanta to Sibirudugu, his horses ran all over these lands where he made war on his own people. Now note, if you compare this, say, with jihadists like El Hajj Omar Tal or Sekou Amadou, that there is this history of jihad in the region, and he was, you could call this a jihad in the sense that he was nominally a Muslim, but it was, whether you call it a jihad or just simply a war of consolidation of power, it was very brutal. The Shi Ali was a tyrannical king. His heart was so hard that he once threw a baby into a mortar and forced the mother to grind it, even while the baby was still alive. The flesh was then fed to the horses. Now, this same story of his barbarism is Yamba Walagam recounts also in the Devoir de Violence, or the Duty of Violence. So you get these kinds of stories. That's an idea of a hardness of heart. This is a thinking about Songhay. This is linked to the animist values of having a hard or a filthy heart, which is linked to the world of sorcery. You'll find, if you're interested in this, you might look at some of the work of Paul Stoller, who discusses this idea of, one must harden one's heart, even in the sense that the Pharaoh in Egypt and the biblical stories had hardened hearts, and certainly Shi Ali was a man with a hard heart. But we also are told that he was debauched and impious. In fact, one of the sheikhs of his time, who lived at Mori Kora, was asked if this prince was a Muslim or an infidel. His actions were certainly those of an infidel, though he made the profession of faith twice over and spoke as a man who was well versed in the teachings of Islam. So there you have it. He was, in fact, a Muslim and seemed to know quite a lot about Islam. But, when the Askiya Muhammad rises up and attacks his son, or gets into a battle with his son to assume power, he tells the Shi Baru that he has to convert to true Islam. So it's sort of the view then that the Askiya adopts. Maybe it was a political strategy or maneuver, but that the teachings of the Shi Ali, if they were Islamic, they were heretically Islamic, and that those were transmitted to his son, the Shi Baru. Let some of his most impious acts be known. This man would put jurists to death. Well, that's a pretty big deal if you're a Timbuktu scribe. He destroyed villages, burning the inhabitants in the flames. He inflicted all sorts of tortures on people. Sometimes he himself would light the fires to kill them. Sometimes he immured his victims, leaving them to die while still alive. And sometimes he would cut open the womb of a living woman and rip out her fetus. So they're making him out to be quite the monster, as you can see. In the end, his acts of cruelty, as well as those who served under him, were so numerous that it would be impossible to record them in a single volume. He besieged the kingdom of the Songhay in the year 69 of the 9th century, or that would have been September 3rd, 1464, through August 23rd, 1465, holding on to power for 27 years, 4 months, and 15 days until the year 897, or November 4th, 1491 to October 22nd, 1492. So the Shi Ali died about the same time that Christopher Columbus got on a boat and sailed to the new lands, or to the West Indies, to the Americas. So this is the era that we're talking about. This again provides evidence. This notion that there was no writing in Africa is just totally preposterous. So here you see we have a document. It's a 500-year-old document. The ferocity of the Shi Ali toward Muslims and his cruelty in all worldly things, as well as in matters of religion, made the hearts of the people overflow with sadness and worry. Deliverance seemed beyond hope, for his reign had lasted so many years that it seemed as if these curses would never cease. However, the day of deliverance came at last, thanks to an impoverished holy man whose daughter had been raped by the Shi. When this unfortunate man came to lodge a complaint at the home of the prince, the Shi swore that he would cast him into the flames if he did not depart from his presence at once. This man left with tears in his eyes. Then, raising his hands to the heavens and turning on the path toward Mecca, he cried out, "O my God, O Master, you who are near us, you who are the ruler of all things, you who see, know, and hear all, I humbly beg you to crush this lustful and lewd creature. I implore you to break this perverse man who has profited for so long from your indifference, who, deluded by your inaction, dares to trample upon a man of God. Hear my prayer and come to my aid, I beg you." This very day, the Shi was visited by 2 holy men who were descended from Mori Haugaru, ancestor of the people of Mori Kora. One of them was named the Mori al-Siddiq, and the other was named the Mori Jiba. They came to lodge a complaint of mistreatment against someone in his family, that is to say, the family of the Shi Ali. When he saw these 2 men, the Shi Ali ordered that they be seized at once, placed in chains, and then conducted to an island and left to die. "Oh my God," cried one of them, "protect us from this man. Make him perish this very instant." The other man then cried out, "And see that he persists in a state of infidelity, not in a state of belief in Islam." At this very instant, the Shi, who was staying at a settlement in the land of El Hajar that was named Kona, was unexpectedly struck dead by God. When his soldiers were certain that he was dead, they buried him in a nearby tomb, although the exact place remains unknown. The curses of God be upon him. So, a couple things to note here. Number one, let's note again the orientation to language, which is not, it's certainly not Platonic. It's not Augustinian, or in a Catholic Christian sense. In this orientation to language, we might think, remember again, the word magic comes from an Egyptian word, heka, which means or power. It means wind, spirit. It also means fluid of the body. And the Songhay word for heka is naxomala. It's a very similar word. The Mande is nyama. These are all words that are not the same as the Greek word logos. So the Greek word logos is the word for word, but logos means a word that is inscribed on, as the Apostle Paul will say, on the fleshly tablets of the human heart. So it's a transcendental or ideal word. This word, by contrast, we could think of it again as an occult materialism. It circulates in the empirical external world. It has a certain autonomy, so that when a person speaks, those words cause effects in the world. So that a spoken word is not just, like, let's say in the Augustinian sense, a sign, again, is not just a thing that points to a thing, but it's significant, not just for its signifying capacity, but for what it is. And what it is something that is powerful, and it is imbued with power. And so so note again, although Islam is arguably a logocentric religion with respect to the doctrine of the heavenly book, or the word inscribed in seventh heaven, which is very akin to the Platonic notion of the word as logos, or transcendental ideal word. Here we have a word that is not transcendental. It really exists, and it can cause actual effects in the world. We're going to see other instances of this as well in the Tarikh. And so it's interesting to note then that this provides evidence again of the fact that the culture of the Songhay, even that of the Islamicized Songhay, is not simply a Muslim culture, but it's a culture in which the residue or the evidence of this deeper, older, what I'm calling deep Sahelian culture for following Stoller and Hale is clearly at work. And so he speaks. It's just like magic, abracadabra. He speaks a word, and the spoken word has an immediate effect in the ontological world, if you want to put it in those terms, or in the material world, I should say. And so it's the speaking. It's in effect, this is in effect a curse, and a curse is also a form of magic. A curse can cause things to happen in the world. And so Sunni Ali Ber is struck dead at the moment that these pious men make these utterances. Now, they say it's the place of his birth or death, remains unknown. There's a legend that the head of Sunni Ali Ber is buried in Wanzerbay. This is where the priestess Kase resides, who's said to be the occult. She's an occult witch who was in the epic of Askiya Muhammad is linked to the mother of Mamar Kase, or the Askiya Muhammad. The Tarikh gives a different picture. Kase does appear in the Tarikh, but not with references to her occult power. But so this is one of the reasons why Wanzerbay is thought to be a center of sorcery. It's not only because of Kase, but because this legend about his head being buried in Wanzerbay. If you're curious about this, John Rush, the ethnographer and filmmaker I mentioned earlier, has a film called The Magicians of Wanzerbay, filmed in 1948. You can easily find this on the web, along with many of the other films by Jean Rush. And he became very interested in Songhay possession ceremonies, and developed a theory of a kind of what we called scene trance, which is a filmmaking, trance filmmaking, which he was inspired by the possession ceremonies of the Magicians of Wanzerbay and other Songhay, and so saw himself as filming and becoming drawn into the scene, and himself becoming in effect possessed. And so a lot of the magic, or the occult sorcery, the animist practices of the Songhay are involve these kinds of possession ceremonies. But you can watch that. I do encourage you to look at these films by Jean Rush. Some people criticize him. Simbain Usmani wasn't particularly fond of Rush. He said he studies Africans like they're insects. That was Simbain Usmani's criticism. And whatever the case may be, certainly Rush created films at a time where there's very little film documentary footage of these practices that are quite ancient. So they're valuable for that reason alone. Okay, The Askiya Muhammad's rise to power. So let's trace this now. What the Tarikh al-fattash tells us about how he came to power. So the Tarikh says the Askiya Muhammad, who in those days bore the title of Tandi Farma, was among those who served in this army along with his brother Amir Kamdiogo, who was then the Katolo Farma and the Farhan Uthman. Baru, the son of this prince, came to be invested with power. This is Shi Baru, the son of Shi Ali, becomes invested with power after the death of his father, while the Askiya Muhammad is a general in the army. But Shi Baru, the son of the Shi Ali, had not reigned for more than 4 months when the Askiya Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, whose party was triumphant, received support from God against the Shi Baru. The second day of the month of Jumada 1 or 1st in a town called Anfoa. At this place, the two adversaries halted to gather their soldiers. The battle was so violent and the fighting so bloody that everyone believed his final hour had come. So in the absence of the Shi Ali, the Askiya Muhammad makes his power grab, and the army split into two factions, and there is this terrible battle between them. But as we're going to see, the Shi Baru is defeated. Now, before the fight between them took place, the Askiya first sent the advisor, the saintly and pious Muhammad Tule, a sheriff who was associated by genealogy to the Bini Madas, to visit the Shi Baru and invite him to embrace Islam. The Shi, who was staying in a town named Anfo, completely refused. As natural for a king, he feared for his sovereignty. Hard words were exchanged between them. The situation became so grave that the Shi contemplated putting this advisor to death. However, the will of God Almighty deterred him from his plan. The advisor then returned to the side of the Askiya Muhammad and informed him of the Shi's refusal, Shi Baru's refusal, as well as his manner of conducting himself. The Askiya Muhammad then dispatched a second envoy. So they're trying to negotiate now. So when the Askiya Muhammad invites him to embrace Islam, this is of course an insult to the Shi Baru, basically saying you and your father were heretics, and if Shi Baru were to take the Askiya Muhammad up in his offer, it would imply that the Askiya Muhammad is more powerful than he was. So he's definitely not in favor of doing this. So what happens now is that when the second dispatch is sent, envoy is dispatched, he doesn't have any success either in negotiating a deal. And so at that point, the Askiya Muhammad selects a third envoy, and interestingly enough, that third envoy is Mahmud Kati himself, who goes and when he narrates. This is one of those interesting moments in the history in which the author becomes a player in the event. So let's see what he says. He says, "This is how it came to pass, that the Askiya then sent me, the Shi, myself, the humble believer, the Alpha Kati," this is Mahmud Kati. "I went to see him in the town of Anfo, which is near Gao. I delivered to him the messages of the Askiya, or the message of the Askiya, the prince of the believers, and I spoke to him with every possible courtesy, as I had been urged by the Askiya Hajj Muhammad, the prince of the believers. I spoke to him with all due respect, hoping that God would set him upon the right path. But the Shi vigorously refused and flew into a passion. He ordered the war drum to be beat upon the spot. As soon as he began assembling his troops, he raged and stormed, trying to intimidate me, while I repeated to myself the words of the poet, 'By my death today I will assure the triumph of Islam for the faithful.'" So Kati doesn't succeed either, and the Shi Baru is so angry that he feels he himself may be killed, but of course he doesn't get killed, and the battle now begins. A violent combat ensued between the two troops. God came to the aid of the Askiya against the Shi Baru, who was put to flight by the soldiers of the Askiya, and who suffered losses so terrible that it seemed all would perish and that the end of the world had come. After God put the troops of the Shi Baru to flight, the Shi fled by himself, to Ioru, where he resided until his death, whereas the very fortunate and orthodox one seized power and became the prince of the believers and the caliph of the Muslims. This is how the Askiya Hajj Muhammad, or God enabled the Askiya al-Hajj Muhammad to inherit all the territory of the Shi Baru, land that extended from Kanta to Sibirudugu, and how this prince came to be master of 24 tribes, which were slaves of the Shi, rather than free men who had been reduced to slavery. So he gets the lands of the Shi, he gets the slaves of the Shi, and he is fully in charge. He does allow the Shi Baru to live, but only because he has bent the knee to the Askiya Muhammad. Now let's turn our attention we're going to, now that we've discussed how he wrestled power from the Shi dynasty and initiated or inaugurated his own dynasty. Let's look at his life story as told by the scribes, or the scribe Mahmud Kati, who absolutely adores him, and his nephew Ibn al-Mukhtar, who also holds him in quite high esteem. There you see again an image of his tomb in Gao. His father, the Askiya Muhammad's father's family name was Arlum, and he was a member of the Silla clan that is said to come from the Futa Toro, or the Takur. Now, we've discussed this previously. So he came from that older kingdom in what is now the Futa Toro area of northern Senegal. His mother was named Kase. She is the figure who is so important in the epic and becomes sort of an image of the high priestess or sorceress in Wanzerbe even today, a very powerful witch, and was the daughter of the Kura Koi Bukar. It would be difficult to enumerate his many virtues and qualities, such as his strong political skills, his goodwill towards his subjects, and his concern for the poor. So unlike the Shi the Shi Ali, now we get this exemplary figure of a decent, God-fearing man. It would be difficult to find his match from any ruler who came before him or after him. He had a warm regard for the ulamas, the saintly personages, and the talibs, the disciples or the students. He reversed the scandalous innovations, inequities, and bloody cruelties of the Shi Ali. He built up religion on the most solid of foundations. All of those who could verify their rights to liberty were freed from slavery. By instituting the qadis and the imams, he restored religion. May God repay him for his zeal in the name of Islam. So again, a very idolized image of this figure whose coming was quite a happy day for the scribes and jurists of Timbuktu. Now here on this map, if you look to the far left, this would be in the year 800 or about 1200 years ago. There you can see the ancient empire of the Takur. And then there's the Ghana Empire. This is one of the oldest of the ancient dynasties. And there you see where it says Gao, the Gao Empire. At this time, this was, 700 or so years, 700 years before the rise of the Songhai dynasty. So you can see it was much smaller, a little dynasty. But also emphasizing the Askiya Muhammad's roots from Takur also, again, reminds us of the interrelated nature of the nobility of this region. So we have different dynasties, but the nobility tend to transform from the same figures and same families in the different dynasties, including the Mande dynasty and the Songhai dynasty. Now here on the left, you see the Songhai dynasty, 1530, and there you see at the tail end of it, the Takur, which is next to the Wolof, which is that, again, what becomes the Saint Louis region under French colonization, but is the Futa Toro, home place of El Hajj Omar. Below you see Mali, this would be the Mande dynasty, and then there's the Masi dynasty, which was the culture, language of the talking drums, which was the way in which that culture was bureaucratically administered. And it bordered Songhai. Sometimes Songhay would attack the Masi and try to seek slaves, and then particularly under Islamic leadership, because the Masi were staunchly animist, so that made them fair game for Islamic slave raids and slave trading. But they were very fierce, and there was a very legendary story about how they once came and sacked Timbuktu themselves. Now, on the right, you see Messina, Sokoto, Toro, Futajal, and these are all the traditional areas of the Fulani. So, does this mean that Askiya Muhammad had some Fulani origin? Well, he's Wakura. He's linked more to like Kati, to the idea of the nobility, but he does come from that same area, and there's no doubt some interrelated. Interethnic relations there as well. The Askiya Muhammad began his preparations to perform the Hajj and to visit the sacred abode of God, the tomb of the Prophet. Grant to him salvation, and the tombs of his companions. May God be satisfied with them. He gathered together the necessary money and equipment for the voyage, sending dispatches throughout his territory to bring him food and rations and other provisions. Then he set off on his Hajj during the month of Safar in the year 903, or September 9th to October 27, 1497. He brought with him 800 men from his army, including his son, the Askiya Musa, and myself, that is Mahmud Kati. So this is a big entourage of people traveling from Gao all the way to Mecca. And Hajj Mahmud Kati is one of those people, as well as Askiya Musa, who will later depose him, as we'll see. And here you can see different travel routes of pilgrimages to Mecca throughout the Islamic world, what the routes tended to be. If you look at the African route, you can see from Timbuktu, it's very difficult, very, very dangerous, very difficult. Traveling, sometimes it took, years for people to get there. A lot of times people didn't arrive, stories about how people would get halfway there and then just lose the courage and just stay wherever they were and then live there for good. So it was very, very arduous indeed, especially going through the Sahara. But he brought with him a lot of people to help him on this journey. Here are some older images of Mecca. You can sort of see what it looks like. I mean, today, in the era of airplanes, there are just so many people that go to Mecca that you have millions of people that go. And but in these times, this is why the title Haji, or Al Hajj, it meant certainly a lot more then than now, because it meant that you had invested years of your life to earn this title by making this religious pilgrimage. And in Islam, it's incumbent on all those who can afford it. So this is one of the pillars of Islam, one of the 5 pillars, to go to Mecca if they're in good enough health and they could afford it. Well, it would be a lot easier to go to Mecca, say, if you're living in Yemen or Jordan, but if you're living in Mali, northern Mali, in Timbuktu, most people couldn't afford it, and the fact that people did said a lot about their devotion to the religion. There's the curtain lifted on the Kaaba of the Mecca, as you can see. Now, in the glorious city of Mecca, the Askiya Muhammad also purchased a plot of land where he built a house, which he dedicated on behalf of the noble altar of the Kaaba. Okay, this is again the altar built by Ishmael and Isaac. At this place, he conducted interviews with illustrious doctors and with pious and other venerated persons. The Sharif of Mecca conferred a turban upon him and invested him with sovereignty by placing a blue turban on his head and by giving him the title of Imam. The prince, it was claimed, had learned that an inhabitant of Mecca had in his possession a few hairs from the head of the messenger of God. May God bestow his blessings upon him and grant to him salvation. And that merchants had sought out this man, lying piles of gold before him. So I wanted to include this little anecdote in our discussion because, again, it gives you a sense of different beliefs about, what we might think of as, magic or sorcery, that even though the Askiya Muhammad is a Muslim who's on a Muslim pilgrimage, he has views about the power of objects that would probably not be welcome or appreciated even by the Prophet Muhammad. So it is it's interesting, though, to see what some of the assumptions are that he has. Now here is this funny incident. He says, they asked him, Askiya Muhammad, to steep these noble hairs in hot water so that the drink might become, or the water might become consecrated. Then they wanted to drink this water and use it for their ablutions. The Askiya Muhammad approached this man and asked if he could see these hairs. And when the man brought them out, these are hairs from the head of the Prophet Muhammad, he seized one of them, put it into his mouth, and swallowed it. Now, you think Kati would criticize him for stealing what didn't belong to him, but he says instead, oh, what a clever trick, and how very profitable. What a celestial favor, how abundant his blessings. So he uses treachery to get hold of this hair, and then he eats it. And in the Epic of Askiya Muhammad, you get a story in which the Askiya Muhammad on his trip is lowered down into into the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad, and he sees onion shoots growing from the tomb. And so he eats the onion shoots, and then those onion shoots give him some of the barakah of the Prophet Muhammad. And that's really what he's seeking by getting these hairs. He's going to get this blessing, but he effectively steals them. Now, whether or not they were actual hairs of the head of the Prophet Muhammad, it seems kind of difficult to believe, but that was the claim. It was also said that the Askiya entered into the enclosed lattice surrounding the tomb of the messenger of God. May God bestow his blessings upon him and grant to him salvation. And that the Barakoi, who was the Mensa Kura, had entered with him. Inside the Barakoi seized hold of one of the columns of this noble enclosure and cried out, O Askiya Muhammad, here lies the messenger of God. May God bestow his blessings upon him and grant to him salvation. Here lies Abu Bakr and Umar. May God be satisfied with them. I place myself under their sacred protection so that I may ask certain favors of you. So now what is worth noting here is this exchange is happening on the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, he's entered into the enclosed lattice. And I want to note this again because the practice of swearing oaths on tombs and of praying at tombs and venerating the figures who are buried at these various places, this is precisely what the Wahhabi Salafists view as heretical, which is why when they came to Timbuktu, they began destroying graves because they feel that the practice of praying at a grave, swearing an oath on a grave is un-Islamic. And whatever the case may be, we see here very clearly that the Askiya Muhammad does value, like Al-Hajj Omar, does value this or understand the significance of where he is standing. He's standing on the grave of the Askiya Muhammad. And so if he makes a vow in that context, he knows how grave it will be should he violate that vow. So it's a very important vow for him to make. And he makes it, let's underscore again, on the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad, much like Al-Hajj Omar when he gains the secrets of the Tijani order. It is also absolutely necessary, continued the Barakoi, that you vow to honor these wishes here in this holy place and with the messenger of God. May God bestow his blessings upon him and grant to him salvation as our witnesses. Your wish is granted, said the Askiya, and their pact was thus concluded. So here's the thing you have to kind of try to get your mind around here. Here you have the Askiya Muhammad. He is making a vow, and he's making a vow on the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad. This again, this is a very African or Africanized interpretation of Islam. It's what is rejected in the Arab world. I underscore it because it's one of those watershed issues and trying to understand differences between the Arab Islamic world and the Black African or African Islamic world, which does not hold the same view. They're not as iconoclastic, is another way to say that. The people who live in northern Mali and Senegal and Niger and the Sahel zone, it's not as iconoclastic as the case of the Arab world. Here you see images of jihadists, Ansar Dine jihadists, led by Iyad Ghali, smashing tombs in Timbuktu. You see the debris from a tomb that they smashed, and this happened very not so long ago. It's just a couple of years ago. They've since been, some of these tombs, after the jihadists were driven out, most of them I think have been restored. All right, here is a little useful advice, kind of like an appendix in one of the chapters that Kati adds about. He enumerates, or Ibn al-Mukhtar does, whichever one, enumerates the virtues of going to certain kinds of tombs. It's almost like, he's recommending like you go to a physician or something. It says tombs that procure the fulfillment of vows that are made near them are as follows. First, the tomb of the Qadi Uthman Daram procures the fulfillment of vows made near it, which is unanimously acknowledged from tried experience. None of the vows that are made at this place are fruitless. I've seen this verified with my own eyes, having myself made prayers to God near this tomb, which God granted to me. God be praised and thanked for this. Right, so very fascinating that it's like it's kind of like wish upon a star. You go there, you pray on the tomb, and your dreams are going to be answered. Your desires are going to be fulfilled. So again, heretical from a Wahhabi Salafist perspective, but very common in West Africa. The tomb of Sidi Yahya, whose effectiveness has been verified, as I have seen and heard from a great number. Now, Sidi Yahya is the Islamic name for the Prophet John, or John the Baptist Yahya. So it's a Islamic version of John or Yahya, and so he's talking about this. There are many other tombs, but I left this. I wanted to draw your attention to this one because this is a very famous one that was attacked by jihadists in the recent conflict in northern Mali. Many persons who have given proofs of it and seen its effectiveness, as I have attested. The jurists of Timbuktu, along with many whom I have met there, have made repeated visits to it, including Sidi Ahmed Baba and the two eminent jurists, Ibrahim and Muhammad, both of whom are sons of Ahmed Bagayoko. Now, Ahmed Baba is there, and he's this very famous Timbuktu scribe from whom the libraries of Timbuktu, the Library of Timbuktu is named. He's also the one who was taken into, he was taken into captivity or held hostage in Morocco for a number of years before before he was allowed to return to his homeland. I think he stayed in Morocco 20 years, but he was widely acknowledged everywhere as a great, expert on Sharia, and so Islamic law. But so he's a Muslim again, but an Africanized Muslim, or Muslim who practices an Africanized interpretation of Islam, and he too advocates praying on the tombs of some of the sort of saints of Islam in order to gain one's wishes or desires or needs. Now here's the Sidi Yahya tomb. You can see on the left, this is the before, on the right, the after picture when this tomb was attacked by these tomb smashing Wahhabis that had invaded the country. Now, eighth, the tomb of the Alpha Muhammad Tule at Hund Biri, whose efficacy has been proven. This is the regular meeting place for people who suffer from leprosy, both those who are mildly afflicted and the terribly deformed. God welcomes the intercession of this saint on their behalf, which leads to their healing, as I have witnessed myself on many occasions. So, another instance of tomb praying, and it's almost as if you're going to a specialist. You got a particular disease, in this case leprosy. So you take your problem to the tomb. You pray. The saint intervenes for you. And again, this is seen as controversial, but very common in West Africa. So they said to him, we pray that you this. Okay, so this passage is referring. So he's still at Mecca, and he's actually just returned from Mecca, but he makes a promise to the ancestors of the men named Mori Haugaru, that they will not be mistreated, they will not be enslaved. And so I'm bringing this in because the oaths at Timbuktu that are sworn, the vows that are sworn with the Prophet Muhammad serving as a witness. If you pray on the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad at Medina, and then, but with the other saints as well at Timbuktu, you pray. But if you swear an oath, you swear an oath with this personage as your witness, which binds you to your vow in a particular kind of way. And so, but the key here is really the oath is, oath swearing is about, promise keeping, about making promises, upholding one's vows. And it's very important for the author of the Tarikh al-fattash, the authors often underscore the importance of vow keeping or promise keeping. So we could think of, for instance, adultery as being, like the biblical Mosaic injunction against adultery is really, again, it's not about having sex out of wedlock. That can be a form of adultery, but adultery means, it literally means, in Arabic it's zina. In the English language, it comes from the French avouer, which means to violate a vow or the negation of a vow. And so adultery, an adulterer is somebody who breaks a vow or breaks a promise. And so it's very important. The Tarikh emphasizes over and over again the importance of keeping one's vows. And one of the things that the scribes admire about the Askiya Muhammad is that he keeps his vows. He upholds his vows. But this one of the things that happens is that when he makes this vow to the ancestors, or to Mori Hargaru, that falls upon his ancestors as well, to protect the ancestors of Mori Hagaru, and that vow is not upheld, we're going to find the author of the Tarikh going so far as to saying this is one of the main reasons for the empire falling, into decline. Is one of the reasons why the empire crumbles is of course, we said that the brothers or the grandsons of the Askiya Muhammad get into a civil war conflict situation. So there's internal conflicts, and then also the Moroccans are going to invade the country, but the authors of the Tarikh are going to insist that it is adultery. It is the fact that the grandsons of the Askiyas did not keep their promises, and this makes them very different from the Askiya himself, who upheld his promises. Okay, so they asked him to write a pass, and he agreed to their request. And this is what they asked for: says, "We pray that you grant us safe conduct passes that will enable us to travel in all the towns of your empire without our interests being harmed or without being mistreated by any of your soldiers who might act with malevolence or who might seek to harm us or to take our goods." So the Askiya Muhammad agrees to their request and orders his secretary to put in writing everything that he had said about this matter. And he says, "I myself," now this in this case is Ibn al-Mukhtar, the nephew, the grandson, or the generational grandson of Mahmud Kati, says, "I've seen it. I saw this safe conduct pass myself, which was shown to me by my maternal uncle, the Kati Ismail, the son of the jurist, the Kati Mahmud Kati." So he says he's seen it himself. "May all those who are wicked and perverse forego their bad inclinations in their dealings with the ancestors of the Mori Hagaru. God will take vengeance upon all those who would cause them the least bit of evil or the smallest injustice. And we command all those who are related to us, our children and grandchildren, to show goodwill towards these men, to honor them and to treat them with kindness. So here we have, it's interesting because the Askiya Muhammad makes a vow or an oath to Mori Hargaru, his ancestors, but the vow is supposed to be binding not just on him, but on his children and grandchildren. And we're going to see they won't honor these vows. And this is going to be, at least for the author of the Tarikh, a very grave fault of the grandchildren of the Askiya Muhammad. He says, who tells us, I saw with my own eyes how a great number of those who descended from the Mori Hagaru, or from their families descending from him, were for sale, or sold into slavery at the market of Timbuktu. These people were sold even though they loudly protested that they descended from the Mori Hagaru. So again, what begins to happen as the empire begins to implode is that the covenants that were made begin to be broken, and it's precisely the grandsons of the Askiya who break them. But the Askiya Muhammad himself, his word was good, and people believed his word. They're no longer able to believe the word of the grandchildren. And this is one of the main reasons why the empire begins to break up. It says, and we're told, so it was that the ruin of the power of the Askiyas was due in part to the Songhay people, which occurred at the beginning of the year 1075. Now, this is the Islamic calendar. In the Christian calendar, this would be July 25th, 1664, July 13th, 1665. So this would have been the era that we're talking about. The era when these Songhay made their hatred and hostility manifest to the Askiya. And I suppose that it was also the curse of the Askiya Muhammad that brought it about, either entirely or in part, due to the fall of his descendants into baseness and depravity. Count only on God, he is the best of protectors. So again, the cursing is linked to, we can think of the vow, the vow breaking is in a sense linked to the question of sorcery itself, and and the curse that falls upon those who violate their oath. So remember, a vow is a spoken utterance. A curse is also a spoken utterance. And we think of what the word is in this context. Again, we need to try not to conceptualize it in Hellenic terms and think about it in terms, again, of this idea of like this Egyptian idea of Heka or Nyama, Naxamala. It's a powerful force in the empirical world. And so the curse of the Askiya has great effects. And we'll see that there are other instances of this as well, that the scribes believe that the Askiya Muhammad himself is endowed with this power. You can think of it as a kind of a magical speaking power. His word is like a magical incantation. Now, we're going to see this in the case of that when the Songhay get into conflict with the Masi. We're in today, modern day Burkina Faso. There's the Moranaba. This is some images of the Masi people, that they remained animist for a very long time, and sometimes they came into conflict with the Songhay. But in one instance, the Askiya Muhammad was said to have attacked and conquered a town of the Masi. And let's here you can see where it is on the map. You can see it's in modern day Burkina Faso. There's Ouagadougou. That was the capital where the Moranaba, the king of the Masi, resided. And so we have the Askiya Muhammad successfully attacking some Masi, and then he comes across a Masi fetish. And let's listen to what the author of the Tarikh tells us. It says this: among the miracles attributed to the Askiya Muhammad, the following is often cited. When he came to the capital of the Masi Khoi, this would be the Moranab, or the king of the Masi, after having decimated and routed his army, he stopped near a tree that grew in this place. At the feet of this tree was an idol. Thanks to divine intervention, the tree immediately rose up out of the earth and fell down upon the ground. When asked what words that he, the Askiya Muhammad, had uttered near this tree, or what he had done to make it fall, he responded, by God, I did nothing except to recite, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. This is the profession, the Islamic profession of faith, the first pillar of Islam. I did not add one other word. This is the story as it was told to be by my father, Al-Mukhtar Gamble. God have mercy upon him. So what's really interesting here is that even though the Askia Muhammad is a champion of Islam and he's attacking an animist people, who are practice a form of sorcery or magic, he himself uses magic, much like the Arab brothers who wrote the inscription on the sheet of paper to kill, or used a charm to kill the Leviathan or the whale, the fish, the hippo that lived under the water and assumed power, using magic to defeat magic. Similarly, we have the Askia Muhammad using magic to defeat magic. And so all of this kind of thinking about the power of the word of the Askia is very Sahelian, and it's also linked to the culture of ancient Egypt as well. It's a pre-Islamic way of thinking about the power of the word. Here are some Masi fetishes that you can see, which this is what this tree would have smashed down upon a fetish that might have looked something like one of these kinds of fetishes. I've seen some other Masi fetishes at Menanga, and some of them can be quite frightening and do have the appearance of looking like a sort of scary devil-like fetishes. The Askia Muhammad remained in power for 39 years, or according to some, for 43 years, which is not correct. He lived 97 years, very long life, and died during the reign of the Askia Ismail. He left behind numerous sons. The first was the Askia Musa. It was at the end of the year of 935, that is September 15th, 1528, to September 4, 1529, Common Era, that the Askia Musa dethroned his father, the Askia Muhammad, and seized power for himself. However, God did not bless his reign. The Askia Musa died the day of the feast of the sacrifice in the 35th year of the century, or what would have been August 15th, 1529. And so, yes, what happens is that the Askia Muhammad begins to go blind. His son, the Askia Musa, whom he took to Mecca with him, seizes power for himself, and he banishes his father to this island off of Gao called Kukuya, the island of the Rose Dunes. And the end of Askia Muhammad's life was somewhat pitiful, and yet even in his even when he's divested of power, the authors of the Tarikh describe him as still having the power to curse and to use his words of power to cause effects in the world. But he loses power at a certain point to the younger, more vital Askia Musa. And then we go from that to a long list of other Askias until we get to the Askia Daud, who is the one who rules for the longest time and during the time of greatest peace and prosperity of the dynasty. Now, the Askia Musa, who was in revolt against his father, seized power through the use of violence, taking advantage of his father's weak eyesight. And the scribes don't like him at all. No one was more despicable or vile than the Askia Musa. No one more despicable than him ever occupied the royal throne of the Songhay or held the office of the Askia. As it has often been said, the throne of the Songhay was too high a place for him due to his incompetence. When he had overthrown his father, the Askia Muhammad, and had driven him from the royal palace, he offended him by taking the legitimate wives and concubines of the Askia Muhammad and reserving them exclusively for himself. So not only did he banish his father to the island of Kukuya, not Kukuya, Koima, the Rose Dunes off of Gao, just across the river. He had relations with his father's wives and concubines, and this was very offensive to his father. The Askia Muhammad therefore cursed the Askia Musa, saying, "Oh my God, put him to shame by exposing his private parts to all. And God heard this curse. The next day, as the Askiya Musa rode out on his horse before all his troops, he spurred his steed to quicken its pace and then fell off his saddle. At this moment, the seam of his underwear ripped open as the 4 boo-boos that he wore fell down over his head. This happened in such a way that he became completely exposed, and all of his soldiers without exception could see his private parts. So this is the shortest chapter in the Tarikh al-fattash, and it gives you an instance of how writing is also a kind of an act of power, because the scribes themselves are deliberately taking vengeance on the Askiya Musa for his inequity, so the one incident, there were other incidents that he was involved in that were significant, but the one incident that they show us in the chapter on him where he's featured, and is simply there for the purpose of humiliating him. That he showed his private parts he fell off his horse. He made a jackass of himself, and this is funny, but it also gives you a sense of how, for the scribes, writing too is not just about recording historical incidents, in this case of historiography, but it is itself an act of power, much like the words that are spoken of the Askiya Muhammad. Now, in Yambo Walagam's parody of the Tarikh al-fattash in the Duty of Violence, or the Devoir de Violence, in the first book of this, he recounts this same incident as well. So let's look at Yambo Walagam's version of this. He says, after entering the courtyard of his palace in full glory, he's going to make this one of the Saifs, who's loosely linked to the Askiyas. He attempted to descend from his horse in order to greet his wives, who were also his stepmothers, when, as befalls all those who blaspheme against your holy name, this is again parody of Tarikh's, he was knocked to the ground by a sudden jerk from his horse. As the Saif fell with a thud, he tore open the breeches of his blue tunic, displaying his lower extremities, not unlike Adam on the day of his birth, to the stunned crowd of onlookers. The fanatic and stupefied witnesses revealed their profound idiocy by interpreting this event to be a divine omen. More than one witness, however, later confirmed that the saddle strap of his horse had been deliberately filed in order to cause this public humiliation. And so we see here, Yambo Walagam is playing around with this incident that occurs that's quite funny, and he recounts the same incident, but in this case, the Askiya becomes a kind of a Saif, who is a kind of a composite figure of a Sharif. Now, the Askiya Dawood, this was the Askiya who reigned during the period of prosperity, and the scribes admire him, and they tell us the Askiya Ishak, this is another Askiya after Musa, was succeeded by his brother, the Askiya Dawood, son of the Askiya Muhammad, who ascended to the throne on the 22nd day of the month of Safar in the year of 955. That would have been March 22nd, 1549. He remained in power for 34 years and 4 months. So he had a long reign indeed, 34 and a half years, the Askiya Dawood reigned. Fortune was favorable to him. He enjoyed all the power and authority he could desire, and he amassed enormous wealth. The truth is that his father, the Askiya Muhammad, and his brothers had worked the soil and planted the seeds for him. When his time came, he had only to gather in the harvest. They had made the bed for him. The only thing he had to do was lie down in it and sleep. So if we think again of that hourglass effect, like I mentioned in the case of the epic, there's not a whole lot that happens in this period because it's a time of prosperity. There's a wonderful story about his reign of generosity, where he has a slave who gives away more than is giving away more of his goods than the Askiya Dawood himself, and it kind of makes him a little concerned, and so they get into this sort of generosity contest. But the idea of gift giving, generosity, of total prosperity. So but as the author of the Tarikh tells us, he was kind of lucky because everything, the way had been paved for him. But it's after him. It's in the generation. So you have generation of Askiya Muhammad, his son Askiya Daud. Then it's in the next generation that things begin to fall apart, which will be the subject of our final lecture on the Tarikh al-fattash. Now, the virtues of the Askiya Daud, his acts of goodness on behalf of those dedicated to the study of Quranic science, his glorious characteristics that were revealed in his manner of behaving towards his subject, are too numerous to be recounted, even in small measure. How then could one recount them in their totality? Listing all of them would take too long. And so we'll stop on this point, and in the next lecture, we're going to pick up on the generation of the grandsons and see what happens to the dynasty after the death of the Askiya Daud, when the sons of the Askiya Daud begin to fight for control of the dynasty.